Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Ground Up Podcast. My name is Matt Walton, and my co-host Matt Huber are here to bring you another special guest that we have onto our podcast today. We're really excited to talk to him. This guy started a school called Petite Lumiere Preparatory School. They've been in business for about 7 months now, and they're a good mix between a Montessori school and classical education, somewhere in between there. He's going to tell us more about that. Where they cater to kids from anywhere from 6 months old all the way to 6 years old in order to help create future leaders for our country, which we desperately need. So Joseph, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking, Matt. And how are you guys doing?
I'm excited to talk to you about this just to learn more about it. So can you tell me a little about your academy or your preparatory school you have here and what kind of sets you guys apart from other education programs?
Yeah, so I'll just start off with the name itself. Petite Lumiere Preparatory School. In French, it means little lights. And what's interesting is when people first time read those words, they think it's a cafe or some sort of fashion design clothing wear or something, but it's far from that. Right now, we are called to raise up these little lights. Like you said earlier, more than ever, we need leaders, and we are in a safe space. We've created this environment so that these children literally are being raised up in an intentional way to be leaders in this world today. And now it sounds very counterintuitive because they're so young, right? But the thing is what we're learning from studies to psychologists to all these experiments that we've seen through the past of the years gone by, specifically after 2020, is the first 4 years of a child's life is the most formative years. And it doesn't make sense to build something of significance later in life without the firm foundation, because everything that stems from that foundation are pillars that allows the parent to nurture and have this child in a creative space to make it a better place. Our philosophy, our values at the school is stemming around leadership. We can see and how we are different from other schools. They'll talk and brag about their academics. They'll talk and brag about how these children can learn Spanish. They'll talk and brag about how they can get their ABCs and mathematics really quickly. But we really think foundationally it's around leadership, instilling confidence in these children, and also shaping their character in a way that they can step up when they're needed to. And I'll tell you what, they can learn Spanish. They can learn all those different things in the academics realm pretty quickly when they understand that they're a leader.
So let me ask you this, Joseph, and obviously you and I have had conversations about this. I had a chance to sit down with Joseph prior to this. I think it was like 4 or 5 hours at the school, and got a chance to meet the staff, got a chance to get to know more about Joseph as a person. I mean, his story, we'll get into that. It is an amazing story to hear how he talks about him and his wife and kind of what they're doing today and what their plans are. It's so exciting. When you decided to kind of make this transition to start this church, what was your biggest challenge? What was the biggest thing you had to overcome?
That's a really good question. I think my wife and I, specifically with this school, so we started Petite Lumiere. We launched the school April, Petite Lumiere Preparatory School. But before that, back in 2021, we were going through negotiations and a conversation with another business leader around the fact that we wanted to start a school. And if you would have asked me 5-6 years ago that we were to start a school, I would have laughed at your face. It just didn't make sense. We were like, wait, we don't have the accreditation. We don't have the qualifications to do this. So I think the thing that was the challenging aspect was I think we were getting in the way of ourselves. Like we ourselves were getting in the way. I think we were already disqualifying ourselves with disbelief. We were already disqualifying ourselves in the standpoint of like, man, this thing seems so big, so grand that it doesn't, how is this even possible? So I think the challenge was trying to get out of our own heads. And we allowed this business leader to speak over us and actually encourage us to start this thing. And how we overcame that challenge was realizing there was a gap. My wife and I were youth pastors at Shoreline City Church here in Dallas. And I kid you not, man, after 3-4 years of just listening, pouring, cultivating, coaching, we were like, man, there's so many layers we have to undo here. It's almost like near impossible for us to do what we can do. But we truly believe God has a way of redeeming people's lives, no matter the circumstances, no matter the moments they've been through, right? But I felt like there was something in us that we could do something different. And it really changed for us when our firstborn child was born in 2019. We asked ourselves the question, Morgan and I, my wife and I, asked ourselves the question, do we start a school? Do we homeschool? Or do we literally find a good school for our son? Because we're at this pivotal moment in time for our children, or for our child in that standpoint. But like, it really hit us to where it's like, I'm not willing to compromise. I've heard enough of what's going on out there. I'm willing to step in the gap, be a bridge builder for this next generation. And I don't care how impossible it seems, we're going to try our best. We're going to do our best. And years later, it was almost like it wasn't perfect. Dare I even say I wasn't perfect, because man, it got hard, because I was working for a company at the time. So I transitioned off as a youth pastor, and then I worked for a company, a home servicing company, as a sales rep, which was already a big left turn for me, because I went from being a pastor to a salesman, and I'm like, what is going on? And through that course, that journey of working for this company, I was learning how a business would run, from the sales department, marketing department, customer service department, and even just how the directors and leads running these different departments would operate. So I was just learning so much of like that knowledge, that business IQ, if you will. And during that, I was side hustling this school. I was in the background working out these business plans, working out all our balance sheets and profit and loss sheets, like all the tools, if you will, to keep this thing going. And my wife grew the school from 12 kids, and we had to cut it back down to 6 kids because of licensing and regulations, because at first it was a babysitting gig. And then we realized there's 12 kids in here, this has to be like a school of some sort, because there's a lot of liabilities at stake here. So we went back down to 6. And when we went back down to 6, did I even mention we started in an apartment? We started this babysitting gig in an apartment. A loft setup where downstairs was the daycare, upstairs is where our bedrooms were and everything. So kind of that separation of living in our household, if you will. And we're in this apartment. We just realized we have to license this thing and also invest in property, in a house that has a backyard that kids can run in. So when we made that transition, we had to cut it down to 6 kids because of licensing and regulations. And once we did that, after 2 years, our waiting list grew to 70 kids. So we had a very high demand on the services that we were providing, but a low supply, if you know what I mean. We couldn't supply this or facilitate the space for them. So then last year, this was 2023, it was like June last year, we were approached by our pastors and who made this offer. We have this space we're about to move into, and this went from a church building from 90,000 square foot to 150 square foot. And the children's ministry, the kids wing, they call it the kids wing, is obviously triple the size of what it was. And then we're like, we've got to utilize this space. We've got to be able to, through their entrepreneurial, creative ways, that we're thinking we've got to figure out how to facilitate this space and not just let it just be empty space and paying these bills without any income coming in. So they reached out to us. They heard about what we were doing at Little World Changes. They were noticing these children from our school, at Sunday school, we call it Littles, were just a standout. They were built different. They would lock eyes with adults. They would say the creed. We have this creed at church. They would say it with confidence, with their shoulders back and neck straight, and with a bright smile. There was just something different about these children. And they made their offer last year, and we wanted to pray about that offer of facilitating this space and being under their leadership. It took us about a month to navigate through different non-negotiables, if you will, just figure out what that would look like, what the business plan looks like, and just kind of working through what we would do with the profits at the end of the day. And we come to an agreement after we kind of hashed things out back and forth for a little bit, in a healthy way, of course. About a month later, we said, yes, okay, let's go ahead and let's start building Petite Lumiere Preparatory School.
That's awesome. And when you said about like the waiting list grew to 70 quickly, that makes complete sense, because when you first started talking about it, we're in the same boat. Like we were like, when we were having kids, we're like, all right, what do we do about their education here? Because I think more than a little bit of people in America are tired of regular public education. Like we've seen through the crap, and we're like, all right, yeah, this is meant to build kids to follow in line, to shut up and do your work 9 to 5 and then go home and live your, and live a little bit out for the weekends and stuff like that too. It's built for that. And our American education, I don't know what exactly it is, but I know it's way lower than any other country out there. Like I think it was 70, I could be wrong, 70th out of the whole entire world in education. And
yeah,
so it's like, yeah, something like that, right? And so it's a lot of parents are having that same conversation that you had. It was like, what do we do about our kids? Do we homeschool them? Do we have time to homeschool my kids? Do I have the ability to homeschool my kids? Like, do we find a good school around here? How do we know it's a good school too? So I think you guys had that same conversation and now did something great about it by putting together the school. And so that's why you had a 70 kid wait list right away, because so many people are just like that. So you talked a little bit about something I think every entrepreneur goes through. Anybody starting a business here, is like you're trying to do something that's bigger than yourself, and you're like, am I qualified to do this? Like how am I the right person to do this? Do I know that? How am I supposed to do this in the first place? So talk to me about how you guys got through that mindset there, because that's something that's hard to do.
That's a really good question, Matt, because at the end of the day, during the course of Little World Changes, I was working for another company, and it's really hard to compartmentalize things, because I'm like, for me, I need everything integrated. I need everything connected. So while I was working for this company, I was constantly in my subconscious mind thinking, how does this connect to the school? Everything that I did in sales, everything I did in like briefing our technicians on like how to sell the membership programs, that was part of my role there. And then what's interesting about what I was doing in the sales realm was I was trying to cultivate and grow our membership program in this home servicing company. And a lot of that has to do with loyalty programs. And then I thought about like, okay, for me to trust someone to take care of my child, there's loyalty at play here. So I kind of giving you a bit of a glimpse of how I worked through those mindset challenges. I was seeing how everything that I was doing was connected to this ultimate goal, was to launch the school. Or dare I even say, it's not just to launch a school, it's to raise up leaders in this next generation. And I think when you talk about the challenges in my mindset, I had to really search deep within my core to see, am I really truly compelled and convicted by this? And you know what, the thing that reminded me of that core conviction was looking at my son. If I don't do this child right here, so my decisions from here on in is going to be impacted by the people that I truly care about. So I think if we could just figure out a way to assign meaning to that goal, because if you my mum has a cleaning business in Brisbane right now, and it's thriving. It's doing beautiful. And my sisters who are with her right now, supporting her business, aren't as passionate about that business. And I've heard this principle, and I think it was from Robert Kiyosaki. He said something along the lines of like, don't do what you're passionate about right now. Do what's necessary. And then once you've done what's necessary, you'll end up investing your time in what you're passionate about. A lot of people are doing what they're passionate about from the get-go, and they don't get paid enough, and they get discouraged, and they start to question their mindset around, is this what I'm supposed to do? And now when you do what's necessary, it's hard. It is tough. And it's like, oh, do I have to learn about taxes? Like, do I have to look through all these spreadsheets? Do I have to literally learn something new? And this is what's interesting about this journey that I've been in, is I had to learn how to unlearn so that I can relearn. And my story, going to the foundation of my story, has a lot to do with that, because there was times in my life where I was questioning everything in the educational system. I was like, why are we learning this? Like, I'm never going to be doing this specific field, or whatever the case may be. So to answer your question, Matt, I know I kind of went on a bit of different tangents here, but to nail it on the head here, you've got to search your core convictions. You've got to feel. I've heard this principle: if you don't listen, you'll feel, or if you don't learn, you'll burn. So there's this principle. Yes, it's kind of harsh and it's kind of like confronting, but at the end of the day, if you know your strong convictions and you're not listening to that core conviction, you're probably in the wrong field.
So let me ask you this, Joe. And you, by the way, I like how you answered that. There's a new phrase in term like that I've heard over the past couple of weeks, and I think Mr. Donald Trump talked about it, which is the weed. That you get to it, you add in a few things, and so that kind of leads me into it. Look, you and I had a conversation about kind of where you come from, and I think that everything you've been through in your life and everything I've been through in my life, Matt, and everybody else who's listening, has kind of always led us down a path to get us to where we are today. So I want to know a lot more about kind of what your school does, or what your academy does to prepare young kids to be those future leaders. But before I get there, talk with me a little bit about kind of your early childhood. In just a couple of minutes, like who was Joe? I think it was before high school, and then I know there was a big change after high school, and kind of those kind of key points.
Yeah, so quick snapshot. I grew up without a father. My mum had me when she was 21. She came from the Fiji Islands, beautiful country, of course. And if you've drank Fiji water, that's where the water comes from.
Does it actually? Yeah. Did it say that? Okay, got it.
Yeah, spring water. It comes from the Mount Fountain over there. It's amazing. Great business model too. So my mum moved to Sydney, Australia with my grandmother. She came straight from the village. Like, I'm talking like an island where they live on kerosene, generators, all that kind of stuff. Kerosene, the stove, ovens. So she went from island to city. It's culture shock. So she had a relationship with this young man and never got to have a real relationship with him. And then what's crazy about this is like she didn't know she was pregnant after 6 months. She was pregnant. And she didn't tell my grandmother who she was living with. So my grandmother found out when her water broke, and you can only imagine her reaction when that happened.
Yeah.
So that's how I was born into the world, with confusion. The family nucleus wasn't there. I was constantly craving identity, trying to figure out who I was, where I was from. And it was just that interesting season of my life, especially the first 7 years. My stepdad married my mum, and he's from the Fiji Islands, and he has an incredible history. His granddad was the first president of the Methodist Church in Fiji. He's traveled the world, met the Queen, like all this crazy, incredible, influential stuff. And here is this guy's son, my stepdad, marries my mum when I was 7 years old. And at one point, I was calling him uncle before he got married with her. So it was this weird transition that happened. And then alluding to what Matt was referring to, when like in my high school years, I was still wrestling with this identity issue. So I was living with my grandmother and my grandmother's boyfriend during this course of my mom getting married with my stepdad and then having 3 kids in the process. So this is about a span of 7 years, roughly. So I moved in with my stepdad and my mom when I was about 11 years old. So you can only imagine where I felt like I was in a safe environment with my grandparents, and then I had to move into this family that I wasn't really familiar with. So I'm already dealing with this insecurity of, do I even fit in? I don't even look like half of my siblings here. Like, it was such an identity crisis that I was going through internally. Didn't want to share it, didn't know how to share it. So by the time I got to grade 10, I was thriving. I was doing well in school. Like, I kid you not, it wasn't like a struggle for me at school. But then until when I was in grade 11, one of my good friends that I respected a lot, he was a great rugby player. I played rugby with him, and I was like, he got all the girls and all that stuff. Man, this guy's pretty cool. I want to kick with him. He was killed in a car accident. We were all at a house party, and he had a lot to drink, and he jumped in the back of a truck, a bed of a truck. And this guy that was driving this truck thought it was a good idea to do some wheelies on a dirt road, and we come to find out he smoked weed before he was driving, so he was under the influence, and this truck flipped, and the truck like literally landed on top of my friend and broke him, like cut him in half. So here is a teenager who's trying to navigate through emotional intelligence, trying to figure out like, what am I feeling, how do I process the feelings that I'm going through of grief. And year 11 and 12, man, I squandered those last 2 years. I felt like not only the identity crisis I was going through, I just lost one of my good friends who I looked up a lot, and I crumbled. So by the end of year 12, I was just like, I squandered everything. I skipped classes. I didn't want to be a part of this organization, educational system. I really didn't like our teachers. So then after year 12, I was like, okay, now what? I need a job. And it was hard, man. I was looking for a job, and they saw my grades at year 11 and 12, and they're like, man, you're wanting to be a graphic designer, you need a good education to step into these roles. So the only thing that I could go into was go into a bakery. And the reason why I could go into a bakery is because I had past experience. I was in year 10, we did this thing where you do the on-the-job training. And I don't know if you guys do this here in the US, but that's what we did there at year 10. It's like giving students a taste of what it's like to be in the work field. So I had the opportunity to work at a bakery, and I got a job out of it, which is amazing. This was a 2-week trial, and the manager's like, we'd love for you to come in and part us. So I was working for this bakery for 2 years roughly when I was at high school. So I got into that field, but in the back of my mind, I was so influenced by my uncle and so influenced by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And they were like military men, soldiers. So I was like, man, I just want to go to the military. I'm just going to go to the army, test it out. So I joined the military about a year and a half after year 12. And what really struck a chord in me was when I saw an Australian soldier, an engineer, was at the tsunami disaster in Indonesia. I just saw a quick little glimpse on the television of an update of one of those soldiers searching for bodies after this aftermath of tsunami. And that right there inspired me. I was like, I want to be that. If I can't do anything great in my life, I want to do that. So I was locked in on joining the military, and I didn't know what that was clearly. So and this is what's crazy, guys, and I'm share this right now. I failed the aptitude test the first time around. And I think I knew, when I look back now and I'm like, I think I know why. I failed the aptitude test to join the military at the most basic level. It's because I squandered the last 2 years of high school. I did not educate myself. I didn't read a book. I was watching TV. I was just completely just ignored knowledge, if you will. I was so ignorant to think I would go into an aptitude test and think I would pass this thing after 2 years of squandering education. And it was like a principle that I learned the hard way. When I failed, I felt the weight of like, Joe, what the heck? Like, what do you expect? Like, I was almost coaching myself in that moment. So so they said, hey, we'll wait 6 months and you come back and try again. When they said that to me, it was like almost like a second chance. I'm like, oh, I'm going all out. So what I did is I went to a trade technical institution school. They call it TAFE in Australia. And I was like, if I joined the military, I would at least want to get a trade. So I joined this technical trade school for about a year, and I was going into the mechanical field, mechanical engineering, fixing cars and all that kind of stuff. So I was going for my almost like an associate's degree in mechanics. It's kind of like a course for that. So I went and did that, but at the same time, while I was waiting to go back to do this aptitude test, I was preparing for this aptitude test. I would go into the college, the TAFE library, and look for aptitude test books. Like, I'm going to pass with flying colors this time. It's no settling. I come back to the test about 7-8 months later, pass it, flying colors. It opened more doors to other opportunities, but I was still marked by what I saw on that television about 12 months ago from that moment. I want to be an engineer. I want to go and search and rescue people. I want to build houses, rebuild communities after these type of disasters, natural disasters. So I didn't go into the mechanical engineering field. I joined the carpentry building field, which is what I saw on the television. So I ended up going through that, did that, I went through the course. So once you join the military, especially in Australia, with a trade certificate, like you're going for a trade certificate, they pay for everything. They get you through all the civil training, military training at the same time. So after 4 years of training in this field, you come away with a Certificate 3 of Building and Construction certificate, which is an associate's degree towards becoming a builder. You can be a, you can start a business in building, essentially, after you do another certificate, which is a certificate for a building construction certificate. So I was in the military for 11 to 12 years after making that decision. I traveled to Afghanistan, I traveled to Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea several times. I traveled the world, traveled all around Australia in this field of building and construction. But you know what's interesting? There was something in me that was like, this is great, but this isn't it. I just felt like my heart wasn't fully in it. Like, it wasn't like, I feel like God was telling me, like, I don't think this is, he's like, it may feel good, you're getting paid good money, you travel the world and also playing rugby at the same time because the military and the rugby team. Like, but this isn't it. I just felt like there was something in my heart, like my heart was beating for the next generation. I was like, I need to step in because of what I went through. And I've heard it said this, the best person you can serve is the person you once were. The best person you can serve is the person you once were. And that kept ringing through my mind. So that was kind of like my childhood going into the work field.
So when go ahead, Matt.
No, you go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so what you did say in the during this whole thing is that emotional intelligence, and that's something we hear a lot more, especially with children a lot. When we talk about the different types of discipline and the way you parent your children and stuff like that, where we're trying to build a lot of emotional intelligence for our kids because older generations sometimes it's very hard for them to express any type of emotion besides anger a lot of times too as well. And so that's something we're trying to instill in our kids. And so I'm guessing with your school here, that's a big part of your education that you guys are doing in it. So I know you didn't have that when you were a kid, but how are you installing that into your children in your school now?
Really good. So we have a kind of a principle model that we've got from the Bible. Because we know that we're training up this child the way you want them to live out. Essentially, you've got to create an environment, especially at home, where the first 4 years of a child's life, yes, of course you got to nurture them. Of course you got to love them. Of course they've got to feel seen and supported. But you also have to redirect them. It's a constant redirect. Especially when they aren't able to comprehend information, or dare I even say comprehend the truth. Because our role as parents is to navigate them and help them and equip them with the truth. Because if the emotional intelligence piece is when you truly understand what truth is. Now, I know there's many other worldviews out there that is navigating through this word truth. But for me, from the Bible, the truth is, it's like, if you know who you are based on whose you are, you can really step in confidence in what you're supposed to do here on earth.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that when you train this child for the first 4 years, specifically with emotions, is you're trying to help them regulate. And the best way to help a child regulate is by you helping, mimicking it, like right in front of them. You're like a mirror to them. You got to actually regulate yourself, not be too reactive to their emotions. You've got to watch them, lock eyes with them, and then you yourself have to go through the breathing exercises. And I've heard it said, if you're calm and then you have that conversation, then they follow. I've heard it said that from a great leader in our day and age, John C. Maxwell. He said that 85% of leadership development is through visual stimulus. 85% of leadership development is through visual stimulus. So whatever they're watching, they'll act. They'll mimic.
So it's not through beating your. So it's not through beating your children. That's what you're saying. That is not. You don't build leadership and strength and grit through beating your children, right? Yeah. So that's a controversial thing because you see it all the time, and I happen to, and I'll look at posts and see it, and I always look at the comments, and I just see the argument, and I don't ever post on it or comment on it because it's a waste of time to ever argue with somebody you never know online. But I just want to look at it, and it's a very controversial thing. Like you just see both sides of it. You know, like people that are like, you got to beat your children, or they're never going to learn. You're never going to be disciplined. You're never going to have this, and then the other side is like, no, I'm not going to beat my children. I'm going to do this instead to help build it up. So obviously you don't beat children at your school because you wouldn't be at school for very long.
Well, hey, you didn't ask them. Don't assume.
I'm just going to assume you probably wouldn't be at school for very long if you beat the children.
The thing is, we want them to understand, especially in the first 4 years, they're still developing in their neurons, right? And then the next 4 years, from 4 to 8, is when my son is 5.
Yeah.
And he keeps asking me, why this, why that, context. And I have to be curated in how I explain to him, because I hope it translates to him at his level. But I'm bringing this up because it's so interesting, because we have so many bad learned traits that we think works, but we haven't had the time to think through and process. Like, if this didn't work back then, why would I think it would work now? And I've heard it said that you're not too old. I think the quote says like this: you're not too old to start again, but you are too old to keep doing what's not working.
Yeah.
So
I think it's interesting. I think that a lot of times people, and I think this crosses all barriers across all societies through all time, where you always go look back at the immediate generation we're in and say, what you guys are doing right now is not working, but it used to be better back in the day, right?
Right.
And I mean, I think there's good things that happen with kids today, and I think there's bad things that happen with kids today. I think there was good things that happened with kids when I was a kid, and bad things. If there's one thing that we really did right, and we're all around the same age. I'm 40, Joe. I think you're probably a little bit younger. 38, yeah. And Matt's around your age too. If there's one thing that we did right, or the average American parent did right when we were kids, and then there's one thing we did wrong when we were kids, what would you point to? Is there one thing you'd point to that was good, and one thing you point to that was bad? Because I've got a couple ideas. I want to hear you first, though.
Yeah, so I actually asked this question to my mother-in-law, and one thing she told me that I will hold truth to myself is, if all else fails, and it was this one thing, and that one thing would be that this child feels loved. That's one principle that I've taken from my grandmother, who had me for a few years, and then my stepdad, who was navigating through this awkward relationship that I had with him, and even my mum at the time was probably lost and confused through the process. We're still navigating it through to this day as I'm 38, is that they really wanted to make sure through their words and their deeds and their thoughts that I was loved. And I think that was a beautiful principle that we can take with us to now. And I would say in the future, what we could do better is to be humble, be teachable. I think sometimes we get in our own heads and in our own way, and through effective communication, because what you don't learn, you won't earn. So we've got to fight ourselves, if you will, break down the walls of pride, and just be willing to just listen. Active listening is key, and as you listen better, you'll be able to communicate better.
So I think everything you said there is fantastic, but let me add one thing, and I know I'm going to just be teeing you up for to say. I think one thing we did significantly better as a society when I was growing up that we've gotten away from, and I think it's hurt us more than anything else, which is our movement away from God in a society, in a general population. And I think that when you have a family built with the foundation around God, built with the foundation around family first, and you have kids that are raised by a mother and a father father in a loving household with a structure behind it, keeping it standing strong, I see the loss of that in general society, the push away from that in general society, and I think that has hurt us more than anything. And so I think it's interesting, when I talk to, let's just say my mother, who was a school teacher her whole life, there's a strong belief in general education that there should be a separation of church and state. But I assume and understand that your church probably conjoins those two and then uses those two to benefit each other. So maybe speak a little bit more on that, because I'm sure I'm teeing you up there. So.
Yeah, you are too. Yeah.
Before you jump into that, Joseph, because I think it's a strong topic that I want to listen to as well, because throughout my life, I went to church my entire life when I was younger. And then as I got older, I let bad Christians influence me, like to where I didn't want to be a part of that. And so what that did is it took me away from God, because I was like, I don't want to be, I see people just being terrible people in general, and I let that influence me to move away from it. So I would never consider myself religious as I got older and got into it. When I had children, though, and I realized that there has to be something good. This world, there's a lot of bad in this world. There has to be something good, and a good way to do that and to put them in the best place is to follow God. And so I've been getting more back into it a lot more for my children and for myself and everything like that. So I'm really interested to hear your answer on this one.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, what was beautiful about my course of history, if you will, was the incubator of love. And the thing is you can't define love without the Bible. Like, you have different definitions, different viewpoints of love and all these different things, but in the Bible it says God is love. So on that way, when we talk about the state and the religious standpoints and all the different factors that builds up a society, dare I even say like this, I've noticed that it takes four things to build a society. It takes politics, it takes religion, it takes culture, and it also takes economy. And if you're missing one of those things, or even dare I say three or two, it's not really a society. We see such societies that are broken and war-torn because they're either missing some of these key areas. But I want to talk about the difference between religion and the kingdom for a moment here, because when I grew up without a dad, I think what the void there was an opportunity, because as I was craving identity, I was actually more curious to find out more about my Heavenly Father. And it was almost like the first 3 to 5 years of my life, I could sense His presence so tangibly, and it was through my grandmother, through my mother. So I don't necessarily, as much as I said it was an identity crisis, I still felt like He was there amongst it all. Even when I failed in that aptitude test, I felt like He was right there with me the whole time. So I think with and that didn't happen by accident. It wasn't by default. It was by design, because my grandmother would literally be opening the Bible right in front of me and read the Bible as I was growing up in the Fijian language. So I would grow up seeing this in front of me. It was consistent, and I would go to church consistently. So a lot of our values that we uphold so dearly as a society, when you read the Bible long enough, thoroughly and intentionally, you'll start to see where these values are coming from. And I know this sounds very like a duh statement, right? But I think we speed past the Bible like it's an interstate, and God is saying, hey, slow it down. This is a school zone. Let's be a little bit more intentional. You're a child. Read and learn from me. And when we take the Bible out, when we take the Christ-like mantra, if you will, out of these schools, we can just read history on what that would look like. Just read history. What direction it will take these children. What direction this next generation will go. I've heard it said that if we don't go by the divine design, this blueprint that He has for us, we will fall under the problem of our destructive defaults. Where I came from in the Fiji Islands, we were cannibals. Yeah, we were cannibals. It was bad. And then in that same country where they'll have a lot of civil war, tribes against tribe, almost has an African tie to that, African genetics and African ancestry behind all this history that we have as a country. There is this pulpit, well, not a pulpit, like a stone carving that you can, it's kind of like a baptismal, how would you explain it? I guess a baptismal stone carving. This carving of a stone was once where a chief or a warrior would cut the heads off their enemies, put it on this stone carving, and literally beat this skull open, and all this crazy stuff that I was hearing about how dark our history was. And then they'll eat the brains as in this, they get smarter and intelligent out of all this. And then when missionaries came to Fiji, that same stone carving now is where they baptize children's heads. All about redemption. And that's a great analogy, or a great story of connection towards our divine design and the destructive defaults. So I hope that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I continue to go back to, look, at the end of the day, Matt and I we've got multiple dozen employees, and we've got multiple dozen employees throughout the country, throughout the world, that is. And at the end of the day, even though I might be in a certain faith base or Matt might be in a certain faith base, we have a lot of people who are in very different belief systems.
Yeah.
Now, when you are, if we go to your overall kind of raising of your own children and that separation, because you mentioned earlier that when you had your kid, your first child, that you had to come to that realization. Matt has had that same realization I did. And unfortunately, some of the public school systems in this country, want to try to instill alternative thoughts that might be outside of that. Now, I know that when you and I spoke, you said that's so important for you to take a student onto your school, the alignment that you need to have with the parent. Is that a difficult thing to do in today's society, or just the people that are gravitating to you, it's a fairly easy negotiation?
We are unapologetic with what we believe. We are unapologetic of how we design the culture of our school. So from the moment you click on our website, it shows our core values from the get-go. And then we do have a handbook linked into that website, and we ask our parents to read this before we have our family interview, just so that it is a win-win for both parties. And when you say, is it hard? I would say it's, for me right now in this season, I am like a person that's going out looking for a diamond, the process of looking for a diamond. So I'm refining, digging, and just constantly like I'm having more conversations to give me a pulse that this is the right person for what we're doing here. So I'm going to these networking environments, we're obviously on social media, and a lot of our videos are going out there, not so much viral, but we're getting the views, if you will, and people who are LinkedIn. So when you say it's hard, I think we've done the hard part by listing down the values and make sure it's in front of them from the get-go, so that there's no room for conflict of interest. And I would say it is hard if you don't do that. If you're not upfront and honest, because I know it's very easy to get so focused on the profit rather than the people, because God has called us to use the profits to love on the people. And what we're seeing in the world today, especially in business, is people love the profit and use the people, not in our business model. Our model is to serve them as best we can, and the tuition cost and the pay is a bonus. Like it's a reminder that what we're doing is valued, but that's not the main goal or priority, if that makes sense. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And just being intentional with what your mission is and what your system is. And look, It's not going to be for everybody, and I don't think you want it for everybody, right? You want it to, like you said, find that diamond in the rough. Now, I want to tell a story to Matt more than anything in our audience. And so I met Joseph about a year and a half ago. We were in a men's group together through the church. And we crossed paths very shortly before he kind of moved on to something else. I moved on to something else. But I remember one of the first things I ever heard Joseph say is he told me a story that really, really changed a viewpoint about how I parent and how I need to parent. And one of the things he talked about was just the simple act of reading the Bible. And he would do that sometimes at night in front of his kids, but he would do it on his phone. And his kids would view nothing but him reading the Bible on his phone. They would just think he's looking at the phone. And the intentional shift of how when he shifted that to actually picking up the physical Bible, so his kids saw him reading the physical Bible. And I obviously applied that into my household, but then I also put that connection to me as a leader. And Matt, you and I both know that one of the things that we talk about is that we never ask our employees to do something that they don't see us doing, watch us do, and know that we're intentional at doing those things. And for us, Joseph, just so you know, to give you a little bit more about our business, our whole mission around our business is to also grow future leaders in and outside of our company. So when we bring people in, we intentionally bring people in that don't have any experience. We don't require experience. And in most cases, we prefer them not to have experience because we want to try to develop them in a certain way with certain characteristics. And we've been very lucky and successful in being able to already develop so many leaders from within our organization into leadership roles. And one of the requirements that I'm unapologetically about is that you must be exceptional at the role you do, and if you ever want to lead somebody in the role that you have. So that's something just to draw a correlation, Matt, to kind of something that I learned from Joseph and then something that I think that we do organically, or maybe not so organically, but it's something that I think is applied in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, that makes sense. My wife reads a lot of books, but they're all on her phone, and I read books on my phone as well. And so you're right. It's like when you think about it from the kids' perspective, they don't know what you're doing on the phone. They see you staring at a screen on the phone. So, and that's just happens to be with your phone, but it's with everything. As you said, like you're reading a Bible, and when you go into parenting, like what you talked about earlier is if you fly off the handle every single time a little bit of stress comes your way, your kids are going to be that way. Like if you show that you can be calm in a situation where like they're freaking out, then they mirror your calm, and they're like, okay, now I understand. And that's what me and my wife have been learning a lot more about, because we have a 4-year-old, and he's challenging every boundary he possibly can. He's doing everything he can to push that by just saying different things, just doing not listening to you on purpose, things like that. He just wants to see that and get the reaction out of you, and so it's hard. It's very hard.
It is.
And I think the easiest thing to do is to fly off the handle and just start going and all right, I'm gonna beat your butt, and then and then put you in your room by yourself and then go away. But the harder thing is to all right, I'm gonna show him that I'm gonna be able to handle this the right way, and I gotta calm down. And I know I kind of took this a little bit further from that, but again, it's like what you were talking about earlier, Matt, about what some of the things that we've seen from the older generations and the newer generations. I think where that type of parenting style gets in trouble is where you don't hold your boundaries, and you might be able to calm, you might be able to show that, but you don't do what you said you were going to do, which is you're not allowed to do this now. I can't let you do that. Like I won't let you do this. And so I think that's where it gets mixed up. A lot of people think you have to beat your children because then they know boundaries, but you can hold boundaries by not hitting your children, but showing like, hey, I'm not going to lose my emotions on this, but I'm not going to let you do that still.
But I think it also ties back to the part where you have to be the person that you're telling your kids they need to be. Yeah. And so, for instance, if you're like not eating your vegetables at dinner, how can you tell your kids to eat vegetables? Or if you're like, hey, go outside and play, but you never go outside yourself, how can you tell your kid to be that thing? So I think it all kind of comes together, and as a parent, we have to focus on making sure that we are the version as a parent that we want to try to instill in our kids. Joseph, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's really good. That's something that I have been instilling in our teachers. So what's beautiful, what we do as a staff is we have a huddle message, and we pray over the room. We really center ourselves rightly before we start the day with the children. So this starts at 8 o'clock, and then we have worship music playing. And after worship music playing, if I'm there throughout the week, I'm sometimes there 3 days of the week, I'll give them a huddle message. And that huddle message is centered around why we are here, why we do what we get to do. And my constant reminder for them is, in order for you to have anything, you've got to do something. And in order for you to do anything, you've got to become something. And I think what we're missing in the educational system right now that I'm trying to bring and instill is how do we center and focus around the becoming, be. I think about a sparrow for a moment. And the Bible talks about, Jesus talks about a sparrow, a bird. A sparrow is a sparrow. It knows it's a sparrow, right? And the difficulty, the challenge for us as human beings is we've just got to be what we are called to be, a human being. Not a human doing, not a human having, a human being. And in order to know who we are, we've got to know whose we are, who designed us, who created us. And I think it's a special place and a special, a beautiful journey that you go on, because you're discovering how the creator and the designer has formed you, created you to become. And what's beautiful about our God that we serve is he is infinite in his intelligence. And he's instilled some of his creativity, some of his intelligence in each of his children. And this is why we have the beauty of talking about the passions and the gifts and talents that we have, and we can use those talents and gifts to serve our fellow human beings who are his children and our brothers and sisters.
All right, so Matt, I think it's time for us to shift over to this. The next part of what we do, Joseph, and this is a quick 10-minute thing, is we're going to run through some rapid-fire questions, okay? So this is just designed to get you quick questions, quick answers. A lot of times this is where the majority of our clips are generated out of. So I'll start. In your opinion, Joseph, are leaders born or are they built?
Definitely built. Takes intentionality and environment.
At what point, if there's one area of building a future leader, what is the most vital point in a person's life where that is the number one place they have the most capacity to grow as a leader?
If you could ask that question one more time, kind of broke out
Sure.
a little bit there.
If I could pinpoint a single time that is the most important for me to focus on building that leader within that individual, is there a point that you would say is the best point to focus on building and establishing that leadership?
You talking about the time or
Physical age.
right now?
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, I believe in a God who can redeem. And the word redeem in the Bible, when you look into Greek and Hebrew, the word redeem means, because every word is built, not spelt, built in the Hebraic and Greek language. So redeem is buying back your time. And when you can focus on the now, whatever's in front of you, your sphere of influence, don't look back, don't look too far forward, right now. Cultivating a leader can happen right now because you can redeem, buy back that time.
Awesome. So give us 3 ways that you guys instill leadership qualities in children.
So I think of the 3 C's. We create, connect, and contribute. Whenever we have our opportunity with these children in this environment, we want them to know that they have creative essence in them, create an opportunity in them. So when the teachers are able to create, or daring to say, I have the opportunity to create with a teacher, to instill in them the creative essence, if you will, and that's their godlike nature, is that they have the ability to focus on the opportunities rather than the problems in of itself. Be a solution-oriented person. And then once they're able to do that, they can connect, figure out how do I connect this to a fellow human being or a fellow child, whatever the case may be. Connection, build that connection. Whether it's through emotional intelligence, whether it's relational intelligence, whether it's something in finding a commonality, just building that connection. And then you have the opportunity to contribute. Every leader is called to contribute. Everyone is a leader. Everyone has an opportunity to lead because everyone has a sphere of influence. Now, whether you lead them in the right way or the wrong way, it's totally up to you.
So question for you here, Joseph. You mentioned earlier you went to the military. You can create your path for your kids. Do you send them to the military when they're 18 or no?
Great question. I've been navigating through that one for a while. I think it depends, because it depends. And this is the thing. You got to know who you are based on who you are, right? And when you know who you are, you'll start to have a more of a broader idea of knowing who they are. And you can only know who they are through intentionality, having a true relationship with them. You'll start to get a pulse of how they're operating. You'll start to get a pulse of how they're thinking, their thought life. See, the thing is that we're not having enough conversations with these children. So for me personally, I'm going to have as many conversations, opportunities to navigate. How are they navigating through truth? I need a pulse. So once I get that pulse, and if they need more discipline, hey, the military is great for you. But I don't want to box them into that idea, because I felt like that was my only opportunity. And I think it's because based on my environment, that's all I knew, right? You only know what you know. There are great other ways to instill discipline. It's not just through the military. But if I see a passion in him, of something in him that wants to travel the world, be paid for it, and also go through the discipline process and follow orders well, I think that's a big one, is not being under authority. I think that's something I'll have to test, is like, how are you under authority? Because if you're not good at it now, maybe you should join the military.
So what are some ways that parents at home who don't have access to send the kids to school, they don't live there, maybe not the money and things like that, what are some ways that parents at home can do what you guys are doing to instill those qualities in their children?
Yeah, I think you would have to understand the transitional phases of the child. And if I can just snapshot this really quickly for them, especially extracting this from the Bible. The first 4 years of a child's life, from 0 to 4, is train. You've got to redirect in the most loving, nurturing possible way. So if the first 4 years of a child's life, if they're picking up the wrong thing, find someone else find something else they can pick up. Quick redirect. Don't tell them they shouldn't do it. Don't do this. No, just find something else, redirect them, and then remove that item. 0 to 4 years, and then 4 to 8 is teach. My child has already asked me from 5 years old. He's asked me why? Context. Help them navigate through truth. Find context and then explain it in a way that's transferable to the child. They're going to ask a lot of why questions from 4 to 8. And then you've got 8 to 12 is transition. Now, there's a lot of theories out there about the word transition, but I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about the biblical transition. Jewish bar mitzvah, they are transitioning a boy into a man and a girl into a woman. Typically, girls are maturing more quicker than the men, and I don't know why. Maybe it's a societal thing. But through the transitional phase, and I'll give you an example. One of my good friends has a son who's 12 years old, who was 12 years old. He was telling me the story. They would walk into a Starbucks, and then he would explain, having conversation, remember the why of the train, right? Explaining to the child, hey, do you know why these thermal mugs are placed right at the door? He didn't know. And then this father is explaining to him that they want you to leave with more than a coffee. And when they're watching a football game, they're like, what do you think they're trying to teach you here? They have a beer in their hand, they have a hot dog, it's highly processed, not good for you. What are they trying to do here? He's teaching the son how these programming devices are training us culture. So transition, going from a boy or going from a child to an adult. You are giving them that information. And then the last phase, which is 12 to 16, is trust. A lot of the teenagers that I was serving in my past few years, they weren't trusting me, they weren't trusting their parents, and they're not even trusting themselves. So now this is where you start to delegate some things to them. Hey, we've got the electricity bill that needs to be paid. Can you use this credit card? And dare I even say, if they have done something they're not supposed to, that's a great coaching opportunity to build trust.
All right, question for you. If you had to choose between these two things, I'm going to give you two different either ors back to back. So number one, if you could choose, is it more important for a young man to be street smart or book smart?
Ooh. That's a good question. I say street smart because I think with the definition of street smart, you're actually doing the thing, right?
And just to follow up on that, I think that you would identify yourself as more street smart than book smart. I would identify myself that. Do you think that you answer that, any potential that you answer that question because of your own leanings versus maybe somebody who is less street smart and who is book smart might find that as more important?
Well, I think about book smart. If it's all trapped in your own head, it's useless. Or if, dare I even say, if you're just communicating it, it's useless. And wisdom is only found in our deeds. It's what you do. So with street smarts, we're actually doing the thing. We're actually practically hands-on. And you actually learn more through experience than you do from reading books, because your brain isn't operated or it hasn't been created to remember everything. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I just don't know if maybe I have come to that same conclusion because of my own bias of where my strength might be versus my weakness. And the second part of the question is, for a young man, do you think it's more important to be emotionally intelligent, like we talked about before, or to be stoic?
Oh, emotionally intelligence rather than stoic, because I think about movies. I'm a big movie buff, and I'm trying to work on my discipline around that area. And the reason why I love movies is because it moves me. And how it's, movies are that's a multi-billion, trillion, whatever you want to call it. They're making a lot of money because it's moving people to pay the tickets. So when it comes to business or being a man in general, especially when you're operating in your business, it's like if you're being stoic, you can be an a-hole at the same time. Like emotional intelligence, you're operating in a different, more strategic manner that you're considering your fellow human beings who, you're trying to build a bridge with everybody. Like, I'm not saying that you have to be friends with everybody. I'd say try to create peace, but if you burn too many bridges, it's just going to be worse off than good.
So going back to when you're going to start something that you, looking to build something that you haven't done before, and you got that mindset again, like, hey, I'm not qualified. Do I have the ability to do this? What are some ways that you use to get over that mindset, kind of like imposter syndrome, if you want to call it that, or something like that, when you're building it, in order to keep moving forward when things seems bigger than what you can handle?
Yeah, I remind myself that I'm on mission. I'm not employed, I'm deployed. So I was rewiring my brain to think differently, because I was hearing other stories from other like-minded entrepreneurs who are well off than I am right now. And I'm getting there, at some point, and I believe it too. And I'm learning these different mantras of it's not fake it to make it. It's believe it until you achieve it. Mm-hmm. Because I think sometimes the way the world or secular mindsets that are out there is that you've just got to hustle and grind and get your head down and work. Don't get me wrong. Yes, there is a season where you need to do that, but that's not sustainable, especially when you're working towards creating a great future for your children and also for your wife. How can you celebrate that beautiful future if you're not there? How can you create a beautiful future for a family and children when they don't want to be there? So going back to your question, Matt, I think at the end of the day, we've got to remind ourselves why we get to do what we get to do. And if you have this time frame when time is like a vapor, and when people say money is time, they're delusional, because money isn't time. You can't quantify those two together. And I get it, in the work field, that's kind of like how they use it, but it's not true. Because if someone would give you $1 million today and you get and a sniper is going to hunt you down at 12 o'clock today, would you take the money? Of course not. Time is more valuable. So I would even say the best principle of the mindset thing is if you are wanting to start a business, or you're, dare I even say, working on a side hustle that can make more than what you're currently making right now, you've got to really refine your why. Why you want to do this, because the passion is the thing that's going to keep you going, and the why is so deeply convicted in you that you'll keep pushing through. It's not just about working harder. It's not just about working smarter. It's about working higher. It's like an elevator. When you get to an elevator, you got to listen for the elevator, and then you got to locate which level you need to go to, and then there's leverage. You got to work in a different mindset. And maybe you're working too hard on something and not smart enough. Maybe you haven't built your business IQ yet, or you haven't cultivated a community they can give you that advice to. And I've noticed this is that people try to build their own business in their own little silo. It doesn't work that way, because business is about people. And if you're not spending enough time with people, your business is not going to thrive.
So it's so interesting. You said the word you said the word why, and the understanding of knowing your why. That's the most important thing Matt and I look for when we are recruiting somebody, when we were talking to somebody, when we're looking to develop somebody, is knowing your why. So Joseph, also in that knowing your why and in that knowing your story that I now know, and Matt and I have had multiple conversations about kind of how I've been reflecting on my own story as we've kind of started this aspect. And man, there's so many things that just happen, so many turns that put you through to prepare you for what is in your future. And at one point earlier in this conversation, you had mentioned your plan. And let me ask you this question. I'm going to ask you a slightly different. Do you think what you're doing today is your plan, or do you think it's a plan that was created for you?
It was created for me, and I'm now catching up on that idea.
Yeah, and I would even beg to say that I agree with you that you were created, and I think that everything that you did, where you say I'm catching up on it, everything that happened up until this point allowed you to be able to do what you're doing today, and created that simple question of what is my why? That if you hadn't gone through every single thing you went through in your life, from being raised for the first 7 years without your father, living with the family that you lived in, raised the way you were, finding God, the tragic scenario that happened with your friend, going into the military, learning all of those experiences. Eventually, we didn't get into how you met your wife and the great story that you have there, but meeting your wife and then eventually coming to America and kind of navigating those waters in there. All of those things prepared you ultimately to have a kid, that made you ask that question that you did, to then ultimately solve that problem by creating what you created today. And if you hadn't been, even one of those things weren't in your story, you might have had a very, very different why at today's world. So let me ask you this other question as well. 3 things to focus on in raising a future leader. If I'm looking at a 10-year-old kid, what are 3 things I should focus on to create a future leader?
Yes. Can I just add on, before I answer this question, can I add on to what you said there, Matt? Because I feel like I'm absurd to say something there. It's interesting because Jesus' journey, when you read his story in the Bible, and I highly recommend people that are listening right now to hear from the Lord and also read the story, where Jesus was hanging on a cross with a criminal who to this day is in paradise. That's what I believe. He's in paradise. This criminal was hanging on a cross right next to Jesus, and he had his one moment. And that one moment, Jesus allowed him into paradise. Because the criminal was asking, can I be with you in paradise? And Jesus looked at him with all the blood and all the pain he was going through. He's like, I will see you there. And then you look at the journey of Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, who went through multiple facets of moments in his life, and he ended up writing most of the New Testament that we're reading today. So I would say, humbly say, no matter where you're at, God can redeem anything. So I think the principle in that is just to surrender. Like, Lord, use me now. Not use my story back then, because what the enemy meant for evil, God can turn it for good. But also, he can shape your future in a way that it exceeds your mindset, exceeds your expectation beyond that you could even imagine. And it's happening for me right now. I'm still pinching myself. How is this even possible? That we have now almost 70 families, 70 kids in our program. We had 6. We 10x'd our business. And I said this to another business leader, and he was like, you're flexing now, man. You need to stop. I'm like, it wasn't me. It was all him. So the created plan that I'm starting to catch up on is like, wow, now I can be in a flow state, not a hustle and grind state. And going back to the three things, so let's say a 10-year-old. needs 3 principles to live off. You've got to know your purpose. Got to know your purpose. Let's start with that with number 1. Purpose. What is the purpose of a thing? The original intent. What's the purpose of a chair? It's for someone to sit on. What's the purpose of this camera that we're on right now? This phone. It's to display something through lights. Like, there is purpose of everything. And I'm asking this of my son all the time. Hey, what's the purpose of this cup? Oh, it's to hold, capture this liquid. So as you're having these conversations with a 10-year-old, start to help them entertain the idea there is purpose in everything we do. The second thing is conviction. What convicts them? What really ticks them off? My son and I, actually my whole family, we went to the Dollar Tree store. We bought some packages for the unhoused people in our city. Now I say unhoused because that's the technical term now we use instead of homeless. There are unhoused members in our city right now that we keep driving past and we want to help them. So we bought these food packages, wipes, all these necessities that they need to be out there to get a good start in their day. So I was trying to cultivate and shape a conviction in my son at 5 years old to help him realize that, hey, you're enjoying life right now. There are some people that don't enjoy it. Doesn't that make you feel a certain way? A strong conviction. Work on that, shape that. And the last thing is influence. 3 things: purpose, conviction, and influence. How do you want to be remembered? When you're not in a room and people know who you are, and let's say there's 5 of them, they're talking about you, what are they saying about you? And for you and I as 38-year-olds, 40-year-olds, whatever the case may be, how do we want people to talk about us in our eulogy? And I look at that, I kind of shape that, and then figure out how does that apply.
That sets us up for our last 2 questions. Yeah, that was a great answer.
One more before we get to the last 2 questions, but I do want to get to those. I got one more for you.
All right, let me say something. Let me say something else though. That I'm not gonna be happy with you, Matt, about putting me in the category. You guys are closer. You're in 40 and closer to 40. I'm closer to 30. All right.
Oh, okay.
My back might hurt, but I'm still younger. Okay.
Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Well, it is what it is. When should a parent decide to choose a school like yours versus public school? Like, when should that decision be made?
That's a great question, Matt. Do you trust the government? That's my first question.
That's what the parents should ask themselves, right?
Yeah.
Do you trust the government to take care of your child? Do you trust the leadership of this government, right? And who knows what people want to pick, right? Dare I say your most prized possession and is under the leadership of this entity is taking care of your child. I don't think I need to even answer that question. But for those who probably need the answers, I would say I wouldn't necessarily do that. And don't get me wrong, we need strong water, we need a good, strong economy. But when it comes to our most prized possession, I think we need to be more intentional.
Yeah, good answer.
All right, Matt, go ahead.
All right, so what is your 1-year goal, your 5-year goal, and your 20-year goal, Joseph? For you, your business already.
Love this question. So my 1-year goal right now for a professional standpoint, where I'm at right now with the school, is I'm trying to onboard more children. Well, when I say onboard more students, I'm saying like-minded families. I want to onboard like-minded families, and we're trying to increase that by 20%. And that 1-year goal, if you will, is I need to increase in my tours for more interest meetings. So that's how I believe I'm going. And I'm sure there's different facets to that to build that percentage up. And then my 5-year goal is to at some point create a nonprofit entity to have a curriculum development organization to start traveling around the world and essentially provide a safe environment in different countries, partner with another ministry, but we'll have our own nonprofit entity with this curriculum development and start sending teachers out into the world to start teaching this curriculum. And could you imagine, these poverty-stricken cities, a lot of these countries that we get to play a part in, a lot of females don't get the same education as the males. So could you imagine a 5-year-old learning how to read? I think we've set this child up for success. So we're planning to start a nonprofit entity next year, and then the 5-year growth, if you will, is to share the vision so that we have more donors, more interest, so that we can start creating and developing curriculum in the next 5 years. And then you said a 10-year goal? 20 is to find my replacement in all these organizations that we created.
Yeah. 20 years will get Matt for retirement. That's about 2 years right there. 20 years. So doing the math for him.
I would like to see myself not be under someone else's schedule, that I create my own schedule. and that I somehow, some way have created this influence where people want to buy my time, pay for my time. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, last question. We asked this every question. At the end of the day, when all said and done, Joseph, what do you want your legacy to be?
Okay, so from a standpoint, for me personally, from my perspective, is to live in my creative space and make it a better place. And whatever sphere of influence I'm in, I want to make it a better place. And that could give solutions to business, whatever case may be, personally and professionally. But for someone from the outside, I want them to look at me and see that this person was intentional with me. He took the time to plant some powerful seeds in me that is divine, and that I wouldn't be here without this person pouring into me. And that's the legacy I want to leave.
Awesome, man. Joseph, I really appreciate this conversation that we had here today. I took a lot from it, especially just being a father here. So thank you so much for taking your time with us today. Thank you so much for being here. For our listeners, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to Joseph's story. Please, if you got any help or any knowledge from this, please like, subscribe, hit the alert button on our channels. And so we have more podcasts coming out every single week. We want to bring more value to you guys. Thank you so much, Joseph. I appreciate it.
Thank you.